If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Exodus chapter 8. Exodus chapter 8, second book of the Bible. Pretty easy to find that one. Page 99. I know you all got fire Bibles after my sermon last week, right? And hyping those. So page 90, that's all I got to say, right? You got your fire Bible out. We're continuing our series, Code Blue. We're in week 4 now. We've been through 3 weeks. We've looked at the rhythm of revival. We've looked at the rate of revival. Last week we looked at the recoil of revival. It's all about the bounce back, remember? It's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many times you get up. Today we're going to look at the remedy of revival. Throughout this series, we've been looking at different ways that an emergency response team responds whenever there's a code blue in a hospital. And we've seen they check the heart rate. They check the heart rhythm. When they're giving CPR, they watch the chest recoil. It's gotta come back. You can't just keep pushing down. It's got to come back. And so the next thing they do is they administer medication. Heather's given me these R's, and then she says, okay, 4 medication. And I said, that doesn't work for me because that doesn't start with R. I need something that starts with R because I need to have 5 R's because that's just the way I roll. And so I've changed that. It's not medication, it's remedy. Because that's what medication is, isn't it? If you go home and you mix something up for your cold, what do you call that? A home remedy, right? So that's what we're going to look at today. We're looking at the remedy of revival. And you say, what are they talking about, medications? Well, if you're responding to a code blue and somebody is dead there, you don't say, does he need a couple of Advil? That's not what we're talking about. They use this drug called epinephrine, and it's basically just like, shooting stuff into your heart to make it jump start. It's amazing. I feel like I've had some this morning. I've got energy this morning. Does it seem like I've had some epinephrine to anybody here? It's adrenaline is what it is, and it's to stimulate your heart, and it begins to beat like it's supposed to. It begins to bring up your blood pressure. It can be a remedy to cardiac arrest. It can be a remedy to septic shock. It can be a remedy to other conditions. But today, I want to go in a little bit different direction. Sometimes, when people go to the hospital, they have this order that they've given, and many people fill it out. We'll talk about it Friday night if you're over 50 and you come and you do the young at heart. Did you see how I threw that right in there? That was great, wasn't it? We'll talk about that. But there's this thing at the hospitals, they call it a DNR. And that means do not resuscitate. That order prevents the emergency response team from giving CPR or giving medication. They can't give the remedy. They can't give epinephrine. They can't do CPR. If the heart stops, their hands are tied at that point. Their instructions are to let the person go. Now, I understand why some people give that order. If I'm 102 years old, I've seen a lot of life, and that's probably going to be my order. If I have a terminal illness where there is a 99.9% chance that I am going to go unless God intervenes in that 0.001, I'm probably going to give that order because there's no sense being brought back just to go through some more pain and live just a little bit longer. I get that. I get why a lot of folks do that. What I don't get is why an otherwise healthy 35-year-old would have a DNR. If you're healthy and you go in and your heart crashes and they say, DNR, we can't do anything about it, and that is the only reason I don't get that. I don't understand it. It's kind of like when I tell Heather, I'm like, man, I really have a headache. How long have you had a headache? 6 hours. Have you taken any medication for it? No, why would I do that? I'd rather complain about my headache. How many of you know that 100% of the time aspirin does not work if it's not taken. That's astounding, isn't it? We're going to look at something similar today in Exodus 8. We're going to look at one of the strangest passages in the Bible. I've read this through, and each time I read it, I'm like, man, I'm going to preach that someday. And I thought it might be a part of a series on the Exodus, but it's not. We're going to just preach it today. This is so crazy. It's Exodus 8, but we're in the middle of a bigger story. So let me just kind of give you a rundown of what's happened so far. Most of you have heard of a guy named Joseph. Joseph, you'll see, he's got this famous, he's a famous celebrity. He's got this play, about his Technicolor dreams and all of these things. But he was a real person, and he lived in Bible times. And he was sold by his brothers into slavery, into Egypt. He ends up getting arrested for a crime that he didn't commit, and he's in jail, and his cellmates have this dream about two of them have these dreams about things, and he says, here's what your dream means. One of you is going to live, one of you is going to die. He says, when you live, go out and tell Pharaoh about how I interpreted your dream. Well, the guy lives, he gets out, he forgets about telling Pharaoh until Pharaoh has a dream. And Joseph, he says, hey, there was this guy back in jail. He gave me a prison tattoo over here on my arm. And he also interpreted my dream. And so he says, bring him in. And Joseph interprets this dream. He becomes the second in command, right under Pharaoh. And he brings all of his family into Egypt, and they begin to live there. And you would think the story ends with they all lived happily ever after. But it doesn't, because Joseph had all these brothers and all these sisters. And they began having all these kids. And the Israelite army the Israelites begin to grow. And they eventually get so big that the Egyptians put them into bondage. They put them into slavery. And so God needs his people to come out of slavery. He needs them to come out of bondage. So there's this man who grew up in Pharaoh's in his palace, and he leaves, and it's a man named Moses, and God begins to speak to him from this bush that's burning, but it's never consumed. And he says, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go in and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. If you listen to the song, it actually went, Pharaoh, Pharaoh, oh baby, let my people go. That's not how the Bible puts it, but that's how the song puts it, right? And if it's on the internet, it must be true. So Moses argues with God. That's a sermon I want to preach someday, but not today. And he said, Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, absolutely not. And so it begins these 10 plagues, and that's when we're in the middle of. The first one, God said, okay, you're not going to let my people go. I'll just turn this water into blood. And all the water in the land was turned to blood. And that's where we pick up in Exodus 8. Exodus 8, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. You ever wonder how God came up with these plagues? I mean, flies are annoying. Gnats are annoying. I don't like frogs. They rank right up there with snakes. We had one in our house one time, and I was home alone, and I remember I called Heather, and I'm like, how do I get this thing? Can you come home and get this thing out of here? She said, no, I can't come home and get this thing out of here. And so I had to pick up this frog. It's nasty. I don't want to touch it. And then he jumped at me, and I screamed kind of like Ella would. I mean, it was crazy. I do not like frogs. So if somebody came to me and said, let my people go or I'm going to fill your house with frogs, I'd be like, see ya, nice knowing you. Get on out of here. Not how it happened here. Verse 3, the Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and your people and on all your servants, And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. That just hit me right there. I think that's where that came from. I used to swim in my best friend's pool, and there were frogs in it, and one of them touched me when I was swimming, and it scared me to death. Maybe that's where it all came from. You know, that's Aaron's fault. He called them up out of the pools, right? That's not in my notes. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, plead with the Lord to take the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be only left in the Nile. And he said, tomorrow. Moses said, be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs shall go away from you and your houses and your servants and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. Isn't that a great word, stank? Y'all ready for lunch now? We're talking about piles of frogs that are dead and decaying, and nobody wants their frog legs out of that. Let me just summarize what's going on here. Moses went to Pharaoh. He says, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. And so God sent frogs to plague the land. This is not symbolism. This is not some metaphor. This is not like saying, telling your kids, I just stepped on a frog. Did you hear that? That is not what these are frogs. These are actual frogs. People were actually stepping on frogs. They were everywhere. Everywhere they went, there were frogs. There were big frogs. There were little frogs. They would go to pull out the food from the oven, and there would be frog legs in there because the frogs had jumped in and then they had cooked them without even knowing it. There were frogs in the Pharaoh's palace. There were frogs in the people's homes. Frogs in their lazy boys. When they sat down, they'd crawl out of the gaps where all the food is usually that you drop down there. They would go to get into their flour, and there would be lumps of flour with little eyes, and they were frogs covered in flour. Think about this. They would crawl into their bed, and their feet would touch frogs under their covers. These frogs were everywhere. When they dropped the bucket of the well down, water would come up, but there'd be like 8 frogs in there. Think about that a minute. You reach into your pocket to get your keys, and there's a frog in your pocket. This is a nightmare. Frogs everywhere. Here's if that were my house, I'd be killing the things, getting them, shooing them. But if you shoot them, another one would come in. And here's the thing, they didn't kill them because one of their gods actually was a goddess who had a frog's head. And so they worshiped these frogs. They wouldn't kill them, they worshiped them. But after a while, the frogs got to the point where Pharaoh said, we can't have this anymore. And so he called Moses and he said, look, we're sick and we're tired of the frogs. We can't sleep, we can't cook, we can't eat, we can't do anything without frogs. So I will let you go sacrifice, but you need to get rid of these frogs. And Moses, he says, well, my God is willing to do that. My God is ready to do that. My God is able to do that. When do you want that done? And Pharaoh says, tomorrow. Tomorrow. Is this not crazy? We're dealing with frogs all over I'd be saying yesterday. Get it done yesterday. He says tomorrow. It's one of the weirdest statements in the Bible. It ranks right up there with the guy who is lame, and Jesus walks up to him and he says, do you want me to heal you? Duh. But Jesus had his reason for asking that. God is saying to us today, I am willing to set you free. I am able to set you free. I am ready to set you free. Are you ready for me to set you free? But most of us are saying, yes, tomorrow. Tomorrow. God, I want to be set free, and I'm going to start that tomorrow. Can anybody relate other than me? There's a rhythm of revival, there's a rate of revival, there's a recoil of revival, but there's a remedy for revival. And most of us have DNRs in our life, and we're saying, God, don't touch this area. God, don't resuscitate me. Don't revive me, because this is off limits to you. I'm not going to let you. And he's saying, but I want to do it. I'm ready to do it. I'm willing to do it. And the time to do it is today, not tomorrow. Too many believers walk around in bondage. We walk around with our depression, and we walk around with our anger, and we walk around with despairing, and we don't need to. God is ready to heal us and work on us today, but we keep saying, let's start tomorrow. One of my favorite advertisements was by Nike in 2008, and they took out these big billboards, and we know their slogan, right? What's Nike's slogan? Just do it. And so they took out these big billboards, and it said, yesterday you said tomorrow, just do it. And I loved it. I wish I'd have bought one of the shirts. I was too cheap. What's the premise of that? The premise is, if I want to lose 50 pounds by next year, I don't start tomorrow. I don't start in January. I need to start today. If I want to run a 5K, we talked about this last week. I don't just say, okay, it's Saturday, I'll wait till Friday. No, we start today. We start to get ourselves in shape. That was the message here to athletes. You need to start today. Don't wait until the day before training camp, NFL players, to start getting yourself in shape. Do it in January, whenever you're sitting at home. Too many of us say, I will start tomorrow. I will start my diet tomorrow. I will start going to church tomorrow. I will get rid of this habit starting tomorrow. And then 10 years later, we're still fat. We still have the habit. And we're still sitting at home on Sundays. We don't have joy.